Is the bench press the most overrated lift in all of football in the history of the world?
I list it as yes. And I'd say general population too. It's just silly how much people value it. Like if someone thinks you're getting bigger, they'll ask how much you bench, not how much you power clean, squat, row, how fat, nothing like that. And if you relate it to football, you and I always used to joke, bench press is really good for if someone's pancaked you and you're on your back. Hopefully, I do think it applies a little, right? But if we're filling the big buckets like we talked about earlier, that should fall pretty far down on your list.
All right, welcome to Building the Athlete. I'm your host, Scott Benson. Today with me is Taylor Houchin. Taylor, how you doing today?
Doing well, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
So Taylor, for our listening audience that doesn't know you, can you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name's Taylor Houchin. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm a co-owner at a athletic performance gym. I'm creating an app right now for general population for fitness. And I actually grew up training under Scott as an athlete, an intern, and eventually as an employee as well.
So when, through those times that you just described, when did you realize this is what you wanted to do when you grew up?
To be honest, it was when I started working with you and I saw all of the hours I was putting at the YMCA with the bro lifts. And, I was working extremely hard. I just wasn't doing the right things. I didn't have the knowledge and the environment around me to really take me to that next level. So once I saw what it could do for me, I was very motivated to do that for others. And it was just very interesting to me, especially feeling it as I learned the information along the way. It was kind of a life-changing growing experience for me.
Yeah. So you knew kind of back in high school, college that this is something you were interested in. You've been doing this for how long now?
I technically started working for you when I'd come back from college when I was 18, 14 years now, coming up on 15 years.
Okay. So you've got some time in it. Has there ever been a time you wanted to get out of it?
Absolutely. There was multiple times, especially financially along the way, where I loved what I was doing, but it was hard to live where I wanted, pay my bills, even just get groceries, things like that. So I always had that battle in the back of my head of doing what you love versus supporting yourself and your future life you're trying to create. But
Sure.
along the way, I think looking back, I'm very thankful I pushed through those to be where I'm at now.
Okay. And where you're at now, you are an owner in the company that you are with?
Yep. So I'm a co-owner at the gym Legendary Athletics in Scottsdale. I have my own online performance business. It's a little smaller, but that's legacy performance training. That's what I started when I went on my own. So I kept that alive so that I could separate those two. And currently we're developing an app with a separate company called ForgeFit that hopefully will drop soon. But those are my three endeavors right now
Okay.
that have all kind of come up recently.
Okay. And if somebody in the Arizona market wants to get a hold of you, where's the best place to do that?
You can either find me on my Instagram at TJHouchin3. That way you can see some of my personal life stuff as well as the business and connect with me there, or reach out on Legendary Athletics website. Lots of ways you can find me. I can leave my socials with a link as well.
Ready to be part of something big? Meet the Rapid City Sports Commission, the powerhouse behind sports in Rapid City. The commission focuses on bringing regional and national tournaments, supporting homegrown events, and creating opportunities for our kids. But it's not just games, it's a win-win for all of us. Youth sports fuel our economy. Hosting events in Rapid City means out-of-town families shop, dine, and stay with us, which boosts sales tax revenues too. To get in on the action, visit rcsportscommission.com, where we're all about the hustle.
All right. So before we talk training, I got to ask you some questions as a former college football player. My alma mater, Iowa State University, has 17 people on the roster, including one returning starter. Absolutely devastated. I don't know that a college program has ever seen this before. I mean, obviously coaches jump around, but to have the majority of your players go into the portal, I know that's not what it was designed for, but what is your opinion on that?
See, it's a tricky one because relating it to my personal experience, I was a Division II football player out of South Dakota. I'd like to think if that transfer portal existed back then, I would have made moves upwards, right? I'd like to believe that. But if I really question it, would I have made it to the Division II? Because they would have been sifting through college players before me. So that whole culture from top down has been crazy. I think as far as a program goes, like you said, that's not what the transfer portal was invented for or made for. It actually just takes kind of the identity away from that program. And then it's also life lessons for these guys that are just, oh, it's not working. I'm going to change jerseys or I'll follow the coach. And then even to the degree of coaches I know, I see their lives uprooted because their guy does a great job or a poor job, all the way down to the strength coach level, where now you're expected to move across the country to a new team. And now those fan bases are seeing something new every year. It's Iowa State will probably be the one that points that out, I hope. Sorry, it has to be your alma mater, Scott, but I'm glad we're realizing how crazy this is.
And it is crazy. What have you seen personally with athletes that you work with that are college bound or in college? What have you seen just in the change in the last 5 years as far as the athletes' goals, desires, where they're headed because of NIL and the transfer portal?
Good question. A lot of them, that are on the higher end, they're already being recruited. They're getting looks. They're shopping around. They're looking for money. They're looking for offers. They have agents or, people that work with their family directly. So that brings a whole nother element of challenging character issues, especially when these are 18-year-old, 17-year-old kids. So I see a lot of the higher level kids shopping around, seeing what they can find, getting offers to get offers down the road, right? It's not actually interest in that school. And then the kids on the lower levels are being affected by that. The ones that would probably trickle in with later offers or even preferred walk-ons, with all the jumping around, it absolutely changes everything. We had Arizona State baseball out here. We had a few kids committed that we train, and I think 11 or 12 of the incoming freshmen their offers just got dropped after committing, after, already signing their letters, everything so it's a completely different landscape than what I was dealing with or you.
So a letter of intent really means nothing anymore.
It's not actually a commitment. Yeah.
Yeah, you're committed to them for the time being.
Tentatively, yes.
Yeah. Talking about football, and everybody's got opinions on this. And you train athletes, I train athletes, and every athlete we talk to initially wants to be a Division I athlete. And you and I both know that there's some things that go into that are maybe out of everybody's control. I think there's a few sports that really speaks to. I think women's volleyball is a tough one. Like if you're an outside hitter, a middle hitter, an opposite hitter, if you're not 6'2" and touch, 10'6", you're not going Division I. And it's as simple as that. Obviously there's exceptions to the rule, but if we're talking the masses, I think Division I football is a lot the same. I'm sorry, Rudy's a great story, but I just, I don't think that's too possible anymore. Obviously, like I said, there's exceptions to the rule, but I think Division I football, no matter how hard you work in the weight room, everything that you do, there's a genetic component to it that, the size, strength, and speed that, if you weren't born a little bit differently, it's going to be real hard to make. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I want to be biased and say football for sure, but I think volleyball might be more specifically harder based on the metrics. With what I've seen from these coaches, we train a lot of girls that go Division I. They want to know their jump touch height, their approach jump. They want to measure their reach so they know exactly what they're touching and how high they're getting off the ground so they know what they have to work with over those 4 years. And I'm seeing them go away from a lot of the girls that don't match those genetic markers, right? And those are out of their control. I think the difference in football is there's so many different positions you can play. As challenging as it is to get in there, and there's a lot of freaks, you see more of the Cooper Cups, the Cooper DeJeans. He's a freak athlete, but he doesn't look the way you'd expect a lot of them to look. I think that's opening people's eyes to considering those lower level, quote unquote, guys genetically, or ones that aren't built as the template they're looking for. But I still would say it's harder than it's ever been because of all the measurements we have, all the ways that we can look at data of who has been successful for those colleges and then go, yeah, we're going to stick to this blueprint. So it makes sense, but it's definitely a new challenge.
Yeah. And, I think one thing that people don't really think about or really understand as far as athletes and parents is you can light it up. Whatever state you're from, you can be all world, all state, all everything, score all the points, score all the touchdowns. And that doesn't really automatically mean that you're going to college and to play at a high level. There's those those athletic markers that a lot of these coaches are looking at first. And if you have those markers, then they're going to look at your game film and everything else. I mean, do you find that with parents where they just think my kids, they're just sticking with volleyball, my kid's 5'8", they had 500 kills this year, we're going D1, and they might not even get looked at.
100%. It's hard to have clear expectations with the parents, but also kind of show them that you're a good program for them to go to. It's a fine balance that I feel myself having because I want to tell them I believe I'm the best opportunity for your daughter, or your son in these cases as well. But keeping their expectations realistic with this is not impossible, but this is what's likely and this is why. That's what they're looking for. It's not really much more than that. And I think parents here I've seen I run into it more than even in South Dakota, but I think that's because they see all these other girls going big, that it's happening a lot more often, in their world of volleyball here, that they're like, yeah, that my daughter can do that. When there's a lot more going on than just that.
For sure. And, I keep saying this and maybe it's selfishly biased, possibly, but I think sports performance and athletic development is more important now than it ever has been, because as a high school student wanting to come out, and whether you're wanting to go to the Division I, Division II level, it doesn't matter. You are now competing against 22 and 23-year-old men and women that have a lot of reps, a lot of time in a weight room. And if you're not going in physically prepared, number one, there's no way you can compete at that level. And number two, if you try to skip those steps and then you do get into a college, your body's not going to be able to hold up. You're going to break down physically and probably be injured all the time. And that's my philosophy right now is that guys like me and you should be busier than ever with these kids. Are you seeing a shift in that mentality?
I'm not seeing a shift in that mentality, but I completely agree. I think here I've seen more of a problem with that than even back in South Dakota. South Dakota, I observed a lot of athletes were multi-sport. They'd go from sport to sport. What I've observed here is kids will specialize a lot more, but they're playing baseball year round. They're doing sevens during, football off season, things like that, where it does take away a lot of the time when they could just be training to be the best possible athlete they could be, the most physically prepared as far as general adaptations go. And you made a great point about, in college not making it if they don't prepare. One reason is because of longevity. People think they can't physically handle it on the field. Well, you have to get on the field first. You have to be able to survive the film sessions, all the nicks and bruises of fall camp and the summer. And I see more kids eliminated from that than actually you imagine them getting hurt on the field or they just can't physically handle it. They don't even get to that point. And so I've seen that shift where it's going away from, focusing on guys like us. And maybe we are selfish, but I think that's why we do what we do, is because you can see the impact you can have on these kids, these athletes.
Yeah. And, and what I meant by not making it in college is if you haven't been in a weight room your high school career and then you go to college and you're expected to be in the weight room every day, especially as a college football player, you just physically you're going to break down.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's stick on the multi-sport athlete commentary for a second. I guess my opinion on it is I think it's individual. I think every kid is different. What is your take? You've had the Nick Sabans and the Urban Meyers that your best chance of being a Division I football player is to be a multi-sport athlete. And I think that's absolute garbage, if I'm being honest, because those guys are only used to dealing with the top 1% of genetic freaks out there.
The Lamborghinis.
Those guys could go play any sport and be good at it at the high school level without putting a whole lot of time into it. The rest of us are different. If you're trying to play 3 sports in high school and you want to be successful, you got to work. And so I think that message has gotten a little cloudy. What's your take on that?
I agree that it is individual. My take is that my age group, it was more important to specify, or at least where I grew up in Rapid, because I experienced a lot of the kids did almost every sport. I was one of those kids that I wish I would have specialized a little earlier to develop that skill base and get more experience, more reps doing that specific thing. Now, on the devil's advocate side of it, I don't think kids play outside as much as we did growing up. I assume you did probably even more than I did. And I think that develops a lot of that athleticism, and playing multiple sports, doing that all the time. We talked about it, how your son, my little brother, they hang out with their friends on video games a lot. That's how they spend their time as opposed to playing sports. So now I can see it being more beneficial, but I wouldn't say it's a one size fits all. Like most things, there's gray area, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I think, the one thing that bothers me, and I know you see this too, is these kids have this message of having to be a multi-sport athlete, or probably more importantly, or more commonly, it's probably the parents that got the message, and now they've got their kid in 3 or 4 different sports, but there is no seasons anymore. Coaches are selfish and they expect kids to spend time year round in their sports. So what I see is kids are specializing in 3 sports. So, you see it in the summer times where, they had to get up and do, they had a basketball open gym in the morning, and then they come to you to work out, and then they have a baseball game in the afternoon, and then they got 7-on-7 league that night. And I think what we're seeing out of that is overuse injuries are going through the roof because these kids, the one thing that does get sacrificed is the strength and conditioning part of it, because they just don't have time or they're too tired all the time, and their bodies aren't strong enough to hold up to all the reps they're getting in their sports. And I mean, that's my opinion on what I see. Are you experiencing kind of the same thing?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm even balancing where here there's a lot of places to go for what I do. I'd like to think I'm the best, of course. I bet they do too. But these kids will go to 3 different strength coaches. So we're getting limited time with them. They're following different programs and they're doing all the things you just mentioned. So 100% agree. I hope there's a shift in it here in the near future. But I think if most parents saw the numbers of overuse injuries and could tell the difference between why those injuries happen, overuse is completely different than freak things like you popped a hammy from stepping wrong or landing wrong, or it's way more common.
Yeah. Yeah. We just had a kid involved in everything. His days were booked from morning to night with different sports, different trainers, this and that. And, 3 weeks into the basketball season, ACL. And, was there anything that him or his parents, obviously they were doing what they thought was best for their child to put them in
Right.
the best position to succeed, but there's so much misinformation out there that more is better, more is better. And I want to talk to you about that later, by the way. There's these young bodies need recovery at some point. And I think, again, the overuse injuries, the ACLs, can you prevent all of them? Absolutely not. But I think they could be cut down on drastically just if there was better knowledge out there. And, a lot of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, to get true, just direct information to parents and athletes. So let's talk about your journey a little bit. You were an athlete with me as a youngster through college, interned with me, and then worked for me for several years prior to moving to Arizona. So let's talk about your view on training as a young person, and then now how do you see it after being in the business for over a decade? How have your philosophies changed, and the way that you work with athletes and how you train them?
Good question. If I had to summarize or give a Spark Notes answer, I'd say I used to believe sport specific to the degree of where it was almost performative or theatrical was the best thing because it imitated what happens on the field. And then I kind of went through a shift in my philosophy after learning more about general adaptation of the body, to where that was the main thing I was concerned with. But as I started doing that, I saw athletes get a little slower, a little less mobile in their sport, or more, they didn't look like they had that same step, that same edge. So I kind of shifted my philosophy more towards making sure we hit all the general adaptations possible while sprinkling in elements of their sport and the mindset and the, neurological part of their sport. And I think that shift happened because I was training like an athlete the entire time with other athletes, as well as coaching and observing all these athletes and the impact I did have and your programming had. And also kind of understanding why you programmed the way you did. That shaped it a lot. And then when I went to college, a huge shift for me was the first 2 years I had a strength coach who was almost all Olympic lifting, almost all as heavy as you can lift, load up the bars. We're not as worried about technique or form. We're not as worried about speed on the field, to where we had a guy that I think hit elements of everything. He had a full spectrum of training and knowledge, and it was very clear he strategically input it the way he wanted to. So I interned under him before I interned under you, or actually alternating years in college. And so I think those were my most formative years of understanding programming and the science of what we're doing. And then the transition to doing it on my own was, getting more creative with my own beliefs and thoughts with those kind of as my base pillars, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Does it surprise you to this day how underutilized speed training and plyometric training is just as a whole in the United States?
Yes, it's most obviously the most dominant thing in every sport is speed and power. If you can jump high and get there fast, you're going to have a better chance than people even more skilled than you. If you're going to run a 4.540, 4.440 in high school, there's a place for you on the football field. They can figure out a spot for you. Not to mention, most people aren't aware that speed and power are the first things you're going to lose or that are going to fade away when you're not training them consistently. So if that isn't one of the core philosophies or principles in your training, you're definitely missing two of the biggest buckets right there.
So let's talk, and I'll probably upset some people, but I don't really
Hopefully.
care. I deal with this a lot with football coaches. They just want athletes in the gym, lifting heavy, got to get big. And to me, it's garbage. If you're not fast on the football field, it doesn't matter how much you can bench press. I could care less about that. It's about who gets there first and who gets there and hits the hardest. And why do you think, so from when we're talking about that guy, that football coach that will not listen to science, will not listen to anything new, we're going to do what Nebraska did back in 1985. That's the best program out there. Why do you think there's those misconceptions out there by coaches?
I think first it's ego, and you made a great reference because I hear that exact reference, which is funny. Nebraska it's like, this isn't the same era at all of that. People have evolved quite a bit since then, right? And if you're not constantly growing and learning, you're going to get left behind. I think so. The ego is a little bit of that issue. And I think there's a balance of a lot of private strength conditioning coaches. I've seen a lot of guys that are not that knowledgeable, do not know how to apply the information that well, and actually aren't helping the athletes that much. So if those coaches have ever experienced that, they're going to put us into that bucket without, listening to what we have to say or actually listening to the science. They're not open-minded in the first place. And then there's the credibility part that goes back to ego of they want to claim their athlete, right? And we're all proud of our athletes that grow and they have to do the work. I don't create any athletes as much as I'd like to think I do. I try to help them the best I can and put them along the right path. It's up to them. So I think it's those three things, in my experience, not wanting to relinquish that control or that success to anyone else.
Yeah. And again, when it comes to training, I mean, you just look at social media and there's too much information out there. Like, it is impossible for somebody who doesn't live this every day like you and I do. It's impossible for somebody to know what's real and what's not. Like, what this looks cool. This got a lot of likes. Maybe that's what my kids should be doing. Or, an athlete sees that and they want to do that. So we hear about speed-based programs and velocity-based training. And I don't think 95% of athletes or parents understand what that means. So let's get into that a little bit. You and I think we train a lot the same way. So if we're talking about training for speed and power, I think people right away think, well, no, my kid needs to be lifting weights. Well, that's included in that. So talk a little bit about, a fully encompassing program to develop speed and power. Doesn't matter what sport we're talking about. How do you approach that with your athletes?
Making speed and power the main buckets you want to hit. I think you make sure you get enough of that with a good frequency, so not too much time between those. So what I like to do is make sure we're getting our 2 speed days a week minimum, and we have 3 days of plyometrics. So we try to spread those out a little because if you do the plyos and speed together, you often aren't getting as much out of it because of how fast you burn out of that, max output type work. But at the same time, if you don't have that many days to get plyos, it's more important to get them in. So get them on the speed day, right? So you're still getting that. And then the weight room aspect is absolutely crucial too. So then you work down to your Olympic movements, your dynamic effort movements. So like speed, barbell squats, box squats with speed, trap bar deads, trap bar jumps, things like that. And then you start working in those strength components. I go from what you burn out on the quickest, right? Or what you lose that a stimulus of the quickest. You can't be super fast at the end of a lift. It's just not going to work very well. That's conditioning at that point. So for me, it's sprinkling all those elements, but hitting your big buckets first and then putting them at a frequency where they aren't happening every day unless you're doing small amounts, but you're still getting everything you need. I want to leave the least amount of days possible between jumping days or speed days while still giving them full amount of time to recover. So these are a lot of things it's simple, but it's complex at the same time. People don't think about how much goes into planning a split or a program for these athletes.
Right. And, neurologically, if you're not, like you said, hitting those buckets, you will start to slow down within 72 hours. Your
Quick.
brain, stops recruiting type twos, but if you think about that from the perspective of team sports in the United States, what percentage do you think is actually training speed?
It'd be hard to guess because a lot of my people I follow, right, are like-minded individuals that do that.
I'm
But
talking as a sport coach who's saying, okay, we're gonna work on speed, or a football coach, or
almost none.
whatever it is.
Almost none,
Almost none.
especially because it's not speed, it's conditioning is what most of them are doing. They think it's
Right.
speed. There's minimal rest and recovery. It's not, then you're not even able to hit your max outputs. They're probably not measuring it, so you're not getting data as well as getting a quantifiable result that kids are chasing, like a score. So there's a lot of reasons why people aren't actually doing speed. They're doing conditioning or just running.
Yeah. So we're going to run some sprints at the end of football practice, or get on the baseline at the end of basketball
Mhm.
practice. Again, that is not speed training. And I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions in the country, is that nobody is training speed. I think, it's one of the reasons I think Tony Holler's been so successful. He was
Definitely.
on our show a few episodes back, and
Feed the cats.
yeah, he's kind of taken over. And, a lot of the Jamaican philosophy with sprinting is, we are never going to run a lap.
Uh-huh.
We are never going to go out and run a mile because it's counterproductive to speed. And you've seen it as well as I have, kids come into your facility and like, hey, coach, I ran 5 miles yesterday.
Yep.
Why? Like, why did you do that? How is that going to benefit you in your sport? Your sport is a series of sprints with a short rest in between. So let's train our speed that way. And I think it's missed horribly. And then the other thing, and I had a good conversation with Tony about this, is actual sprint work helps to cut down on injury because it teaches your body to perform at that highest level of output. And I think it's so huge that we miss this as a whole in the United States. And so I think it's so important for us to be spending time talking about this right now.
I agree.
Tell me, and you talked about speed days. Do we want to do plyos on the same day? Because you do have a limited amount of output. You need to have high recovery on those things. Do you think the term plyometrics, I think it's been so badly abused with CrossFit and every other person that talks about plyometrics.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little bit. I want to hear, your terminology for it. What actually is a plyometric for people that are listening?
Well, I'll give you the first one where people will be surprised. Not a box jump.
Right.
We need to have that rapid deceleration and acceleration. So, like low amplitude plyometrics would start with your pogo hops, your ankle extensions, your band assisted pogos, things like that. Then you get into more advanced ones like technically sprinting is a plyo. It's the most advanced form of plyometrics. But our hurdle hops, which is a Benson, I think you'll find this funny. There's multiple gyms around here, Scott, that have the big yellow hurdles now because of me coming to their facility and working with it. We're jumping, and it's kind of cool to see. Those are some of the more advanced ones where you can create large amounts of force, decelerate, accelerate, learn how to move with your body, which is going to, one, give you more of that output, two, make it so you can actually sustain it in a live environment where you're not so technical and following the exact movements. Things just happen. So it's a great for injury prevention. But I'll geek out about plyos. So I guess I can't give you a solid, a Webster's dictionary definition on it, but like speed would be your most max output sprints would be your most advanced plyos we could do, all the way down to pogo hops.
Right, right. And so I think it's also important for people to understand, and you kind of hit on it with, you have the eccentric portion. So if I step off a box and I land, that's the eccentric portion.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I explode and jump, that's the concentric portion.
Mm-hmm.
But the most important part of plyometrics is what happens in between, which is called the amortization phase. And that's the transition from eccentric to concentric. And, again, you talk about geeking out. This is definitely geeking out. But
Yeah.
when you watch a kid, a 10-year-old that comes in and you set up hurdles and tell him to jump over it, there's going to be a pause every time he lands before he jumps.
Maybe a
And that's
couple
that,
steps.
right. That's that amortization phase. And that's the brain protecting the body, because the brain is not used to reacting very, very explosively and fast. And so that's why we see such a huge improvement in movement over the first 4 weeks, because that amortization phase gets shorter. And now, we're going from eccentric to concentric very, very fast, high rate of force development there. And, like you said, a box jump is not plyometric.
Mhm.
A jump squat is not plyometric, because you cannot move fast enough to decrease that amortization phase. And I think that's so important for coaches to understand that.
Absolutely.
Not everything is plyo. And if a little bit of plyo is good, that doesn't mean a lot of it is bad, because it goes from the same thing we were talking about, speed to conditioning. So, if we're fatigued and we're breathing hard and we're still trying to do jump exercises, we've lost the neurological part of that, because we can't move fast enough.
Absolutely.
So plyometrics have to be very, very limited, and as do sprints when we're truly doing sprint output. And I just think those are things that people don't really understand. So
Shows how much
with
goes
that
into it, really.
right. And then with that in mind, how do you bring, and you kind of already answered this, but if you're trying to max somebody out as far as speed, let's say they've got the state track meet 2 weeks down the road, type specifically volume and intensity, what are you doing in the weight room that is going to equal max output on the track?
We're going to go very heavy, move it very fast, obviously within the pattern that they're supposed to hit, but lower the volume on the accessory type movements, the big strength, slow movements. And so I like things like pin squats coming from a high joint angle, heavy weight, because when you're sprinting, you're not going to get into that deep knee flexion, hopefully not, or else you're not doing it right. And so training in that specific joint angle that applies, especially right before big events, is huge, as well as getting out there and running fast. People always talked about tapering when I was growing up, and we would always taper down before events, and I always wondered why I didn't feel that good. Yet if we had a track meet on a Tuesday and then one on a Friday or Saturday, I seemed to run much better. It was that realization, and then you guys pushing me to hit like 95% max on squats, or 90%, with spotters obviously, but I could feel the difference to the degree of where I would do it. Being a receiver, speed was my main goal. I would lift the day before games. I would lift really heavy, move the bar really fast, but limited reps.
Yeah. And I've transitioned a lot of coaches to understanding game day lifts.
Yeah, love
And
those. Love them.
boy, I've gotten some coaches that have told me how crazy I am and
Cancel him.
how little I know. But you take a kid, and especially, like, let's just talk baseball in the summertime, instead of laying around on the couch all day, we get in, we do some light cleans, moving that bar as fast as you can. You put it with a plyo, a ball slam. We're activating system. We're recruiting type 2 muscle fibers, and we're not laying on the couch all day.
100%.
So they get to their game at night, and they're feeling much, much better. What is one thing working, let's just say with high school athletes, what is one thing that every athlete could do that would be a simple fix to make them faster immediately?
Every athlete could do. I think a lot of people miss the technical work, which isn't the most fun to do. It's my least favorite part, but that helps reinforce positive positions, reinforce what our goals are, and actually give your body that stimulus. So like if you're working on your hip drive compared to a cyclical hamstring motion, incorporating drills that apply to your goal personally, And what we like to do is we do a skill development drill into a run so that as they're doing the skill development drill, they transition into their speed, into their sprint portion, and can feel if they're doing that skill or not, or how to actually implement it. Now, I guess that kind of is a caveat because you said every athlete, but they would probably need a performance coach or an actual speed coach to help them identify what those are. But that would be my first. And then if it's just anyone without a coach, get out and sprint. Long periods of rest, get out and actually sprint at your highest output. Take long rest periods till you feel fresh and build those up progressively.
Yeah. Do you feel like as a sports performance coach, you get a brand new athlete, very limited exposure, or even they have been training, do you feel like within, 30 minutes you can make a difference in speed development?
Absolutely, because of how little people focus on it. And there's often very simple things that even if you know what you're looking for, if you're not watching yourself or filming yourself, you don't know how to make the change. So something as simple as switch timing. The timing, like you talked about amortization on the jump, same thing with the rhythm of switching. If your arms and legs aren't in sync, or if they're not switching at your peak height where it's not too much, but you can produce force coming down, or if that bottom leg is pausing before it comes up, it's going to cause all types of rhythm issues. So something as simple as that can change an athlete's speed in a day. We have a cool example of it because that's even at the lowest level or someone that's pretty moldable and brand new. We have an athlete named Homer Bush who runs with Seth and I. He actually just ran 25 point, I don't want to say it wrong, 2 miles per hour the other day. Looked like I was walking behind him in the video. I won't send it to you. He started out with us in the high 22s, low 23s. He has the MLB combine record for the fastest 30-yard dash ever out of their 60 meter. So he is an example of even him coming in with all that freak ability, and he's a 98%, percentile athlete. He had some simple mechanical things we could change. And that was probably out of a month or 5-week period. He's gone up from like 23 flattish. I hope I'm saying that correctly, to 25-2. And for people that aren't aware of that, that's a huge jump and a huge
Right.
difference.
Do you think a lot of coaches, especially at the high school level, they label their kids, well, those are my fast kids, these guys are not. And do you think that's why there's an absence of speed training, is because coaches just assume they either have it or don't?
Yes. And I was thinking these people would know who I'm talking about, but screw it. I was at a banquet with other coaches. So you'd think more like-minded individuals than not. And I said something about, or someone said, you can't teach speed. And I chuckled thinking they were joking. And I said, wait, you're serious? You don't think you can teach speed? And their main argument was that they picked the worst athlete on our team. He said, you can't make him into Tyreek Hill. And I said, that's a different argument. You can
Right.
absolutely improve anyone from the baseline of where they're at, unless they come to you a genetic freak and are already doing everything right, which, to be honest, I've never ran into one of those. So I believe you can always teach speed. If you think that, you probably don't have the knowledge or the information to do so, or the experience to. But I think a lot of these coaches believe that, oh, these guys are who they are. Yep, he's always been fast. He's always been slow. Well, maybe that's because you're not doing the right things to improve.
Yeah. And you have ran into one, because Tip Ryman's one.
Okay,
And
yeah, he's a freak.
that's why at 272 pounds, he runs a 4.5140. And that's the only one that I've ever seen.
Mm.
And we live in a country where we want big rewards. So if I'm gonna work with a kid, the expectation is he runs a 6-second 40. He better be running a 4.5 within a couple months. That's not how this works.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take, let's just say, a basketball team, and you concentrate on 10-yard accelerations, and you drop everybody on the team, let's say, 2 or 3 tenths of a second, which again, over 10 yards is huge, but it's very, 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 very realistic and very possible. So you're telling me that basketball team as a whole, they're not going to beat their guy a couple times a game down the court for an easy layup. And if that happens, if each guy does that a couple times, you're talking an extra 16 to 20 points. Those are the type of gains that people need to be after. But of course, we want it all. We want the biggest possible gains.
Yeah.
Sports performance just does not work that way. It is working your butt off consistently to get small gains. You and I both know that. Unfortunately, the general population does not know that.
No. They see all the highlights.
Yeah, yeah. How do you approach all this differently from male to female athletes?
I'll give an example that will kind of tie in. We were doing hurdle hops the other day. The girls and the guys had the same drill, different blocks. My girls group continued to jump over the hurdle and not even miss. And they would say things like, "Oh, I think I need to go down. It's too high." Or I'm like, you haven't missed a single rep all day and you're doing well. No, we're staying here. Where I have my boys group will hit the hurdle and then go, "Oh, I'm going to raise it up." So it's simple. A lot of people want to think it's the same. It's not. I approach the girls more by a lot of the times by encouraging and challenging them positively in the weight room, especially, and making them feel like this is your place and showing them how it benefits them. A lot of the times, the guys, I got to get after them in a different way. Sometimes I'm talking a little trash to them. You know, our group benefited a lot from that. The group that I started training with you in, that kind of cultivated who I was as an athlete. But I think it's a different approach. And obviously, there's going to be some boys and some girls that fall further on the spectrum the other way. But especially in a team environment, it's I think important to challenge them and meet them where they're at.
Right, right. Okay, let's pivot for a second. Let's talk about your training days. So, we're talking 15 years ago at this point. I was a new strength coach, new venture.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was a Division I athlete, I just automatically knew how to be a great strength and conditioning coach.
You had
And
those.
I'm kidding completely, because I didn't know what I was doing. What I did have was I had an exceptional group of athletes and really dynamic personalities. And you just made the comment, it really kind of defined who you were, because it was a tough group. Like,
Extremely.
you weren't going to get a free pass. You weren't going to get sympathy from anybody. You were going to get pushed to the max every day. And from character building, absolutely. But I look back on that and I don't train people like that anymore. Let's kind of dive into that a little bit. Like, it was a defining moment for you, for your character, but how would you have changed the training aspect of it?
I think our overall volume was crazy. We did a lot. It was always at the end too. We competed more than we should have. There should be elements of times where you compete. We were competing on things where we should have been competing on whose form was better, or competing on, who can do this movement the best. We were doing other things like at the end, like, oh, we're going to run 5 more hills. Oh, you're not going to run one? You're throwing up? Okay, let's run another one. Like just to rub it in people's faces. And like you said, that built a lot of character and a lot of grit and resilience. But as far as our total output, it's exactly what we talked about. We also would do a lot of plyos, like a lot more reps than we probably should. No, I'd rather err on the side of that where you're working hard, but definitely would be easy to adjust now that we know what we know. But I would say most of it kind of shaped me understanding how I'd train now. So I'm thankful that you weren't as far along yet as you are now in that. Do you feel like you've adjusted a lot of that now that you've transitioned away from, your into your later years of doing it?
Yeah, I think, I absolutely focus more on quality of everything. So, you're dropping the workload drastically, but, teaching movement and, especially when it comes to speed, and then you're jumping and landing mechanics, change of direction, everything in the weight room, and what's weird is, at the first part, I didn't really have people, we didn't like, I don't remember us squatting and deadlifting a bunch. We did a lot of Olympic lifts. And I'm actually kind of grateful for that because, with that group, trying to out squat and out deadlift each other every other day probably would not have been good for people. But, we ran a lot of hills, which I still love. Still have athletes run hills. But we didn't do a lot of, we went to the track, but our speed workouts probably became conditioning.
Actually, yeah, they definitely did. Now that you say it, they definitely did.
Yeah. And it was just, I was new. I didn't know. And it's awesome to be able to look back and for a strength coach to say, yeah, I didn't know what I thought I knew back then. And I've gotten a lot better since then. I think, there's a big difference in strength coaches, sports performance coaches. It's not something, if you're a year or two into it, I'm sorry, you are just not going to be where somebody that's been in it for 10, 15, 20 years. There is just too much to learn. There's too much to learn about movement, the human body. Anybody can program. Anybody can say, go do squats, go do bench press, go do cleans, do this many for this many sets. That's not coaching. That's not training. And I think that's a huge misconception in what we do. What's your thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree more, and I experienced that in college where I was a 2.8 GPA guy. I was not that interested in anything outside of strength and conditioning and football. There were kids in my internship course that were 4.0, 4.3 students, aced every test, would be upset if they didn't get 100%. But then when we got to the platform or the field, we're not equipped to, relaying that message to the athlete. They weren't equipped to leading that type of environment. So there's a lot more to it that comes with experience. I'm not saying I did right away, but I realized the difference very quickly. And that's why I never want to be a weight room warrior or just a field skill guy or just a bookworm, I want to be a combination of that. How can I bring the books to the platform, the books to the field, and then connect with my athletes? And that's something you can only learn, I feel like, from experience, which I was so grateful. I didn't have to start with my own clientele or start with like 3 or 4 clients. I got to jump in at your facility where I don't know if I'm even lowballing it by saying hundreds of kids and some adults as well. So that experience, I had a chance to, be in that right away.
Yeah. Yeah. What, you've had the experience now to where you've worked with enough people and you've worked with Division I athletes, you've worked with pro athletes. What do you see? Let's talk about professional athletes they've made it and they're on a roster. What do you see with their training habits? And again, with, the potential to hurt some feelings or upset some people,
Let's
but
do it.
what do you see with professional athletes?
A lot of them are soft, in my opinion, with their approach. I ran into it with baseball a lot, and you'd have the few that would completely adhere to your philosophy and trust you, but usually that takes time. But most of them, I'd say we were going to do sprinting or certain plyos. Like, I'm not doing that. And I don't know if it's out of laziness or protection of their body and not trusting, the science or your coach. But I witnessed that a lot. The guys that want to make it and are hungry and haven't made it yet, they have a little different want to do the work, in my opinion. Now, that's not all pros. You bring Tip Ryman in here, it's pretty crazy what he's doing, but that's part of the reason he is how he is.
Right.
So I think there's a spectrum of it, but sport to sport, I experience different things. In football, most of the guys, I think it's such a physical aspect that if they're not doing these extremely hard things, they feel it and it's on the film right away.
Yeah. But I also think it's a message that comes down from the top, especially, in football with, just everything they do to protect players, in my opinion, puts them at risk of injury. So, not going full contact, not going full out on everything. I read Jerry Jones's book about when he was with Dallas, and they would go hard scrimmage 3 days a week during the season. And their injury rate was so low, where now you have these guys going half rack all the time, no contact, and the injuries are through the roof. You have to condition the body to what it's going to be doing in competition. And I think, and I'm not picking on pro athletes, but
Right.
I think it's very, very common where, they're looking risk reward. And so they back off the training once they've made it, which is going to, it's obviously going to hurt their performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, and it does go back to trust. They have to trust their coach, their performance coach, and understand that they need to keep pushing forward. All right. So let's, I got to ask you this, because I love, especially when I'm talking to football players, is the bench press the most overrated lift in all of football in the history of the world?
I list it as yes. And I'd say general population too. It's just silly how much people value it. Like if someone thinks you're getting bigger, they'll ask how much you bench, not how much you power clean, squat, row, how fat, nothing like that. And if you relate it to football, you and I always used to joke, bench press is really good for if someone's pancaked you and you're on your back. Hopefully, I do think it applies a little, right? But if we're filling the big buckets like we talked about earlier, that should fall pretty far down on your list. And I know speed coaches say it correlates directly to arm drive, and I just think it correlates a lot less than all the other things you could be focusing your time on.
And I'm not in any way saying that you should not do it.
Right.
Because it's a big power movement where you use a heck of a lot more than just your chest when you're benching heavy, but it should not be the first thing that you're doing.
And for some reason it is. And every kid wants to do it. If you walk into this weight room here, it's a commercial gym. the benches are always pretty full. The squat racks never are.
Right.
And this gym, I would say, is more functional than a lot of them you see. And for that to translate to athletes is even sillier to me.
Yeah. I just always have to throw that question in.
Does everyone answer the same way? Have you ever gotten a bench is great for?
From every offensive line coach I've ever talked to,
Uh,
I've gotten in some pretty good arguments, but again, it is what it is. If you think standing up, pushing a lineman is just using a bench press movement, then obviously you don't understand it very well.
I feel like sled work, med ball, chest punches. I could list off 5 or 6 things right away that would apply more. But yeah,
Absolutely. Yep. All right. So here's how we're going to wrap it up. This is something new that I've been doing. We're going rapid fire questions.
Oof.
Okay. So I want short answers. And we're going to get through about 10 questions here. You ready?
right, let's do it.
There's no wrong answers unless they're wrong answers.
Unless they're wrong.
All right. What is your favorite training tool right now?
The hurdles,
Most common mistakes high school athletes make?
benching constantly, not focusing on speed.
One piece of advice you'd give your younger self as a coach?
Continue to absorb from people that are older than you. You don't know it all.
Okay. I'm going to ask you that same question. Advice you would give your younger athlete self?
You're further along than you think.
One cue you use all the time?
Ooh, control over weight.
Pre-workout snack?
Peanut butter, honey, banana.
Heat or cold therapy?
Heat all day.
Biggest training myth?
You can't teach speed.
If you could ban one lift, what would it be?
Bicep curl.
Best supplement?
Creatine.
Best athlete you have ever trained with or played against?
Hate to say it, Connor Casey.
Awesome. All right. Well, Taylor, thank you so much for being on the show. We covered a lot of things. It's easy for you and I to talk shop because it's what we experience every day, but hopefully, we've made some or produced some good information that parents and athletes and coaches can take away from this. In our world, if you can just, if you can get one simple thought through to an athlete or a parent, it's a victory. And so I sure appreciate you taking the time. Always good to talk to you. Always great to get together when you're back in town. And I'm just really happy to have you in my life as a friend and as a somebody that I can bounce ideas off of, and just appreciate you.
Right back at you, Scott. Before you go, I got to say thank you. A lot of everything you've taught me has shaped, the way I think and my programming. And I'm super thankful for that. And to be on here, being kind of interviewed on your podcast is kind of a full circle, cool thing. And I'm very appreciative.
All right. Well, it's not going to be the last time you're on here because I'm sure we could fill up a lot of hours talking shop.
I think so.
All right. All right. Thanks a lot, Taylor, and we'll talk to you soon.
See you, Scott. Thanks.
All right. Thanks for joining us today on Building the Athlete. Today's guest was Taylor Houchin, former Benson Sports Training athlete, intern, and employee. He got his start with us and now is doing some big things in Arizona in the Scottsdale area. So yeah, he gave his info at the beginning of the broadcast. If you want to check him out, definitely follow up. He's a great coach. Benson Sports Training, that's us. BensonSportsTraining.com. You can catch us on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube. We've got lots of videos out to kind of show what our training is really about. Hope you learned something today. There's a lot of good information. It's fun to get together with, with partner in crime and talk shop. But at the end of the day, definitely want to make sure that we're putting out information and content that you, the listener, can benefit from. So thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.